When I had just turned 18, I discovered that the $40,000 college fund my grandfather had left for me had vanished without a trace. It was the money he had saved his entire life, placed in an account under my name when I was only 12 years old, with his words engraved in my mind. "This is the key to your freedom." But on the day I needed it to pursue my dream of going to college, all I saw was a blank screen with a balance of zero. My parents calmly told me they had used that money as a down payment for my sister's new house because she needed a more stable start. In that moment, my entire world collapsed. I left home empty-handed, slept in my car, washed my face in public restrooms. Yet, from that darkness, I learned how to rise again, teaching myself programming, starting a business, and becoming a millionaire before the age of 30. Years later, as I sat across from my parents in a boardroom, I put everything back into its rightful place. If it were you, betrayed by your own family, would you choose silence or stand up to reclaim your worth? I truly want to know where you are watching this story from and at what time, so I can see that I am not alone on this journey. Hi, my name is Gina Carter, born and raised in a small town in Ohio. That town had nothing remarkable except endless cornfields, an old high school with dusty window panes, and a main street people called downtown, even though it only had a few small shops and a family diner that had been open for decades. My family lived in a two-story white-painted house with worn-out shingles at the end of a quiet street. From the outside, anyone would have thought we were a normal family, even a little better off than most households in the area. But inside those walls, the truth was very different. In my family, there were two daughters, me and Vanessa. She was 3 years older but always treated like a princess. From a very young age, I realized that my place in my parents' eyes was never the same as Vanessa's. I was always the child expected to take care of myself, while Vanessa was sheltered and cherished like a treasure. That difference showed in every tiny detail of our childhood. I still remember my 10th birthday. I was hoping for a cake with candles, just like the ones my classmates always had. But when I opened my gift, all I found was an old sweater that my mom had taken from my cousin's hand-me-down pile. My parents told me, "This is still good, it keeps you warm, you don't need anything more." They never thought about how it might make me feel, that on my own special day I got nothing new at all. Yet, only 2 weeks later, when it was Vanessa's birthday, my parents ordered a 3-tier pink cake decorated with delicate sugar flowers. They even hired a clown to perform at a party filled with nearly 20 neighborhood kids. I sat quietly in the corner, watching my sister beam with laughter in her brand new princess dress, feeling both bitter and unsurprised. To my parents, every joy of Vanessa's mattered, while my happiness only had value if it didn't cost them anything. And it wasn't just on special occasions. When I started high school, I had to wear Vanessa's old clothes and shoes with worn-out heels that my mom insisted still worked. I was never allowed to pick a dress I liked from a store. Meanwhile, Vanessa always had new outfits every season, and my parents proudly said, "She needs to look good to feel confident." I remember the one time I dared to complain. My father looked at me with a stern expression and said, "Gina, you have to be independent. You're stronger than your sister, you'll be fine." At the time, I couldn't understand why I had to be strong, why I had to settle for less, just because I was able to endure. All I ever wanted was to be loved fairly, to be treated like a real daughter. In that house, there was only one person who made me feel I wasn't completely invisible. That was my grandfather, Patrick Carter. He had been an engineer at an industrial equipment plant, a simple man but full of grit. After retiring, he lived in a small wooden house on the edge of town, where the apple trees filled the air with fragrance every autumn. I would ride my bike there on weekends, sit and listen to him tell stories about working night shifts in the factory when he was young, or about the long days he spent learning new skills so he wouldn't fall behind. He was the only one who truly listened to me, the one who let me speak out the sadness and loneliness I never dared to share with my parents. He would often pat my head and say, "You have a fire inside you, Gina, don't let anyone put it out." When I was 12, he called me into his small study at the end of the hallway. He placed a dark wooden box into my hands. Inside, there was no gold, No glittering treasures, just a small key and a carefully sealed envelope. He said, "This is a bank account I opened just for you. It has $40,000 in it, the money I saved over many years. I don't believe in wasting money, but I believe that education is the one door that can free you from the limits of this town. Think of this as the key to your freedom." I remember nodding, my eyes welling up because no one had ever placed such trust in me before. He explained clearly that the account was under my name, and only I would have the right to use it when I came of age. I kept that little key like a treasure, always carrying it in my school bag. When my grandfather passed away a few years later, my grief was endless. His funeral was simple, with only a few relatives attending. My parents handled it just enough to be done with it, as if they didn't care about the legacy of spirit he had left behind. But for me, the memory of my grandfather and his promise of that college fund became the only source of strength whenever I felt lost. I was certain that the money was still there in the bank, waiting for the day I would step through the gates of a university. Every time my parents told me I wasn't as worthy as Vanessa, I would whisper to myself, "One day, I'll use the money Grandpa left me to leave this town, to prove I can go far, and to show that his trust in me was never misplaced." I threw myself into studying while working part-time at the school library, saving every cent to buy reference books and prepare for the Saturday. I knew my family would never support me the way they always extended a hand to Vanessa. Late at night, when Vanessa was asleep in her room filled with new things, I sat at my old desk, holding the little key my grandfather had given me, picturing the door to freedom waiting for me to open it. I imagined walking down a tree-lined path on a big university campus, proud that I had not let him down. The day I received my conditional acceptance letter from Columbia University, I nearly cried. It was the dream I had nurtured for years, from the nights studying under that dim desk lamp to the endless hours of drilling SAT problems in the library. Columbia, a name I had once believed belonged only to wealthy kids in New York, was now written clearly next to mine in an official letter addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, feeling as though the whole world had just opened up before me. But at the same time, a wave of worry echoed in my mind. Tuition, living expenses, all those enormous numbers, could I really afford them? Then I reassured myself. I had the $40,000 my grandfather had left me. That money was my lifeline, my ticket out of Ohio, the start of a new life. So on a May morning, wearing a blue shirt with a frayed collar, I walked into the small bank branch in the center of town. I still remember the cold feeling as I sat down in the waiting chair, my hand clutching the little key my grandfather had given me years ago. The bank clerk typed a few keys on her computer and then looked at me with an awkward expression. "I'm sorry, your account currently has no balance." I froze, unable to believe my ears. I repeated the name, the account number, even held up the key in my hand. But on the screen, there was still nothing but the empty figure 0. My ears rang, my vision blurred as if someone had just yanked the ground out from under me. My whole world seemed to collapse. I rushed home, heart pounding, a mixture of anger and despair. In the living room, my parents were sitting, sipping coffee. I threw the acceptance letter from Columbia onto the table, my voice trembling. "My account, the $40,000 Grandpa left me, where is it?" My father paused for a moment but quickly regained his composure. He leaned back in his chair, his voice calm to the point of coldness. "We withdrew that money to make the down payment on a new house for Vanessa and her husband. Investing in a home for a young family is more practical. You're smart, you'll figure it out." I went numb. My mother set her coffee cup down, her eyes showing a hint of pity but her voice sharp and precise. "Gina, you know you're stronger than your sister. You'll find a way to manage. Vanessa is different, she needs stability, she's not as capable as you." Those words landed like a knife straight into my heart. All my life, I had grown used to favoritism, but never did I think they would dare take away the one chance my grandfather had given me. I tried to hold it in, but the tears kept streaming down my face. "That's not your money. That's what Grandpa left me." He said it clearly, it was my key to freedom. My father frowned, his voice hard. "Don't be selfish. We're a family. Vanessa needed it more, so we helped her. You'll be fine. In that moment, I realized I didn't truly belong to this family. I was just a forgotten shadow, while everything good was reserved for Vanessa. I turned away, not wanting them to see me break. I went to my room, my heart feeling crushed but a strange resolve igniting inside me. I couldn't keep living in this house where fairness had never existed. I opened the closet, pulled out an old suitcase, and packed a few clothes, a notebook, and the little key my grandfather had given me. I stood still for a few minutes, looking around the room where I had grown up, where my childhood drawings still hung on the walls, then took a deep breath. I knew that if I stayed, I would only keep being trampled. My mother stood at the door, her eyes flickering with a hint of worry. Where are you going? Don't make this a big deal. One day you'll understand we only wanted the best for both of you. I looked straight into her eyes, my voice hoarse. If you truly wanted the best for me, you wouldn't have taken away my one chance. I won't beg, and I won't come back. My father stepped forward, his tone firm. Gina, don't be foolish. You've never lived out there, you won't survive. I gave a thin smile. I will survive. At least it's better than living here, where my dreams are treated like nothing. Oh, I quietly pulled my suitcase down the stairs. Vanessa was sitting in the living room, looking at me with an expression half pity, half triumph. She smiled faintly and whispered, "You'll be fine. You're stronger than me, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I just tightened my grip on the suitcase handle and walked straight out the door. The sound of it closing behind me echoed like a final period at the end of a sentence. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, where I would sleep, or what I would eat, but I knew one thing for sure. I no longer wanted to be tied to a home that had betrayed me so completely. Outside, the cool May night wind blew past. I wheeled my suitcase across the parking lot, opened the door of the old Ford Taurus I had saved up from part-time jobs to buy from a neighbor. Sitting in the driver's seat, I switched on the car light and stared at the little key my grandfather had given me. Tears welled up again, but this time not just from pain, also from a silent promise. They could take away my college fund, but they would never take away my will. I would find a way to survive, to rise, and one day I would show them the price of stealing the future of a child they had once dismissed. In the darkness, I reclined the seat and pulled my thin jacket over myself. I could hear my heartbeat clearly, stronger and more determined than ever. That was the first night I became homeless, but it was also the first night I was truly free, free from the invisible chains of my family. I was no longer Gina, the abandoned daughter. I had begun to become Gina, the woman who would rewrite her own destiny. That first night sleeping in the old Ford Taurus, I truly felt the cold weight of loneliness. I parked in the lot of a 24-hour Walmart, where the yellow lights never went out and the constant flow of people made me feel a little less unsafe. I lined the seat with my thin jacket, curled up like a frightened cat, pulling my suitcase close as if it were the last wall between me and the outside world. The rumble of trucks starting up, the shuffle of footsteps on the concrete, the shrill alarm of some car in the lot, all of it blended into a harsh, metallic symphony that kept me tossing and turning until dawn. I longed for a soft bed, a warm room, but more than anything, I longed for the sense of safety a home is supposed to bring. In the morning, I slipped into the store and hurried into the public restroom. Locking the stall door, I turned on the faucet and bent down to wash my face. The icy water woke me up but also reflected back a haggard face and red-rimmed eyes from lack of sleep. I dabbed at my skin with paper towels, smoothed down my messy hair, and stepped out with a practiced calm, as if nothing had happened. I was learning how to smile, how to walk naturally, so no one would know I had slept in my car the night before. Breakfast was usually instant noodles bought in bulk from Walmart or a slice of white bread with a smear of peanut butter. I sat in my car, heating the noodles with a small kettle plugged into the cigarette lighter, the only thing I could afford from a thrift store. The taste was bland, sometimes half-cooked, but it kept me from going hungry. Each time I lifted a spoonful of noodles to my mouth, I thought of the dinners back in our family kitchen, where my mother always served the best dishes to Vanessa while reminding me to eat less and leave some for your sister. Even now, though I had escaped that house, I still ate with the taste of humiliation in my mouth. The days blurred into one another as I settled into a routine, sleeping in my car, taking quick showers at a budget gym where I paid $10 a month just for access to a clean bathroom, and applying for any part-time job that would take me, but in a small town, opportunities were scarce. My job applications never drew attention because I was just a recent high school graduate with no experience, no references. Every time I came to the address line on a form, I froze, unsure what to write. I couldn't exactly put the Ford Taurus in the Walmart parking lot. One night, as I sat in my car typing search queries on my old laptop, leeching off free Wi-Fi from the cafe nearby, a heavy rain began to fall. The water pounded against the windshield, trickling down in long blurry streaks. I huddled into my thin jacket, feeling impossibly small. My tears mixed with the rain, and for a moment I thought, maybe they were right. Maybe I won't make it. But then another voice rose up inside me, my grandfather's voice. You have a fire inside you, Gina. Don't let anyone put it out. I tightened my grip on the key he had left me and whispered like a vow, I will not break. Even if I have to start from zero, I will keep going. One evening, when I walked into a small cafe to buy a cup of hot tea to fight off the cold, I met Mrs. Jenkins, the manager of the place. She was a woman in her 50s, round in figure, with gray-streaked hair neatly tied back. She watched me closely as I fished out loose change from my pocket to pay. After handing me the cup of tea, she tilted her head and asked, "Where are you staying, dear? You look so tired." My heart skipped, unsure of what to say. Instinct told me to hide my situation, but her warm eyes made it impossible. Hesitantly, I admitted that I was living in my car, that I had just graduated high school, and that my college fund had been taken away. She stayed silent for a moment, then sighed softly. Good heavens, why should a child like you have to go through this? The next day, when I returned to the cafe to use the Wi-Fi, she called me over to the counter. Listen, Gina, she said, we're always short of help at night, clearing tables, washing cups, taking out trash. If you need work, I can give you the evening shift. It's not much money, but at least it's something steady, and you'll have a place to stand. I looked at her, my eyes nearly overflowing. I nodded quickly, thanking her until my voice caught in my throat. For the first time in weeks, I felt someone had reached out not to take from me, but to lift me up. From that day on, every night after 9, I put on a plain black shirt and worked behind the counter wiping tables, washing glasses, taking out the trash. The work wasn't heavy, but it gave me a reason to keep moving, a small income to buy more food, and most importantly, the sense that I wasn't completely invisible. Mrs. Jenkins often pressed a leftover pastry into my hand, saying, "Take this home, don't study on an empty stomach." I never forgot her kindness. The days of living in my car continued, but now I no longer felt completely lost. I knew I was still at the bottom, yet at least I was trying to climb up. Each time I lay back on the car seat, I closed my eyes and pictured the day I would leave that Walmart parking lot behind, walk into a university lecture hall, and begin a new chapter. I didn't know how long the road ahead would be, but I knew the fire my grandfather had lit inside me was still burning. And as long as it burned, I would never stop finding ways to rise from the ashes. Every night after finishing my shift at Mrs. Jenkins' cafe, when the last customer had gone and the hum of the espresso machine softened into silence, I would sit at a corner table and open my battered old laptop that often froze or crashed. Using the cafe's free Wi-Fi, I accessed online courses. At first, I only studied basics on YouTube. How to type my first lines of code, how to write a program that printed "Hello World." The moment those words appeared on the screen, I shivered. For the first time in weeks, I felt I had created something, small but entirely mine. I gradually dug deeper, signing up for free courses on Codecademy, teaching myself Python, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Every line of code was like a small brick laid to build my belief that I could change my life. During the day, I couldn't rely only on my cafe job. I took on pizza deliveries for a local shop, driving all over town in my beat-up Ford Taurus. After each delivery, I rushed to a dishwashing shift at a small restaurant. At night, I tutored a neighbor's kid in math to scrape together a few extra dollars. The schedule drained me to the core, but I knew I had no other choice. I needed money for gas, for instant noodles, and most of all, to keep the fire of learning alive. There were moments when I sat hunched over my laptop, coding with stinging, sleep-deprived eyes, and the sound of laughter from nearby college students reached me. They chatted about exams, group projects, and internship opportunities at big companies. Watching them, I felt a mix of admiration and pain. I should have been one of them, if only my parents hadn't stolen my college fund. But instead of letting that pain crush me, I turned it into fuel. I promised myself I would never let injustice bury my dreams. One autumn evening, as I was wiping down tables after my shift, a middle-aged man walked in. He wore a wool coat and carried a thick briefcase, looking every bit like a professor or scholar. He ordered a cappuccino and sat near where I usually studied. When he noticed me with my laptop open, taking notes and typing code, his curiosity got the better of him. "What are you studying?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment before quietly replying. "I actually haven't gone to college. I'm teaching myself programming." He studied me closely, his expression a mix of surprise and intrigue. "Self-taught? That's not easy. But I can see you're serious." We began to talk. He introduced himself as Professor Alan Morris from the Computer Science Department at Ohio State University. When I told him about losing my college fund and living in my car, a shadow of sadness crossed his face. But then he said something that changed everything. "Gina, you have potential. I think you should apply for a scholarship at Ohio State. They have programs for students from difficult backgrounds who show determination. I'd be willing to write you a recommendation letter." I sat frozen, my eyes filling with tears. For the first time since my grandfather had passed, I felt that someone believed in me without conditions. I threw myself into preparing my application. During the day, I worked while drafting essays, writing about my journey from losing the fund my grandfather had left me to teaching myself programming. I wrote with complete honesty, no embellishments, no disguises. I wanted them to see who I really was, a girl who had been betrayed but kept moving forward with resilience. I submitted my application with fragile hope, but also with the determination that if I failed, I would try again. A few weeks later, while I was washing dishes in the restaurant, I received an email from Ohio State University. My heart pounded wildly as I clicked it open. The words appeared. "Congratulations, you have been awarded a partial scholarship." I sank to the floor, tears spilling onto my soap-covered hands. In that moment, it felt like I had just been pulled out of a deep pit. It wasn't just a scholarship, it was a lifeline, proof that my efforts had not been in vain. That evening, I rushed to the cafe to find Mrs. Jenkins and Professor Morris to share the news. She hugged me tightly, her eyes glistening. "I knew you could do it, Gina." Professor Morris smiled warmly and said, "This is only the beginning. Remember, knowledge is something no one can ever take from you." I nodded, my chest burning with a faith I had never felt before. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving, I was moving forward. In the nights that followed, I sat in my car holding my laptop, no longer feeling the cold as before. I knew the road ahead would still be hard, but now I had a destination. Ohio State University. I closed my eyes and imagined myself walking across the wide campus, head held high, student ID in hand. In my memory, I saw my grandfather smiling, his voice echoing like a blessing. "The key to freedom is still in your hands, Gina. Use it." End of quote. On my first day stepping onto the campus of Ohio State University, I could hardly believe I had truly made it there. The long stretches of red brick buildings, the maple trees casting shade, the crowds of students rushing by with backpacks slung over their shoulders, it all felt like I was entering a whole new world. I registered as a computer science major, a field I had fallen in love with during those nights coding in the cafe on borrowed Wi-Fi. The schedule was heavy, but I no longer felt the kind of exhaustion that came with despair. By day, I threw myself into classes, and at night I worked shifts at the cafe, the restaurant, or tutoring. I slept far less than my classmates, but my heart was always filled with determination. I moved into a freshman dorm, a small room but infinitely warmer than the cold Ford Taurus I had once called home. There, I quickly ran into a familiar issue most students faced: splitting living expenses. I had 3 roommates, and each month we had to divide up costs for electricity, water, and internet. But there was always someone who paid late, someone who forgot to transfer their share, and soon arguments started to break out. One night, as I stared at the expense notes in my notebook, an idea struck me. Why not create an app to help everyone manage these shared costs clearly? The thought consumed me, and I spent hours at my computer sketching out the first lines of code. I named the app Split Nest, a simple name meant to evoke the idea of sharing the nest. I built a basic interface that allowed users to input expenses, automatically split the amount for each person in the group, and send reminders when payments were due. At first, it was just me and my 3 roommates using it. But then one of them shared the download link with a friend, who shared it again, and soon dozens of students in the dorm were using Split Nest. I had never imagined that something I built to solve a small personal problem could spread so quickly. One afternoon, while I was sitting in the library, a student I had never met before walked up to me and asked, "You're the one who created Split Nest, right? Thank you, because of your app, my group doesn't fight about rent anymore." I froze for a moment, overwhelmed by a joy I couldn't put into words. It wasn't just recognition of my programming skills, it was proof that I could create something useful, something that touched other people's lives. Word about the app spread quickly through the student community. One of my professors suggested, "Gina, you should think about entering this in the student startup competition. Your idea has real potential." At first, I hesitated. I had never thought of myself as someone who could stand on a stage and pitch in front of a crowd. But then I remembered the betrayal at 18, the feeling of my parents taking away my chance, and I told myself I would not let fear stop me again. I started looking for teammates. In one of my classes, there was a student named Daniel, smart, energetic, and talented in design. When I told him about Split Nest, he was immediately interested and eager to join. We spent night after night in the common study rooms, fueled by coffee, working to improve the app, adding a feature to split bills by percentage, integrating digital wallets, sending reminders by email. There were nights we worked straight until sunrise, watching the first rays of light spill through the windows, and still we didn't want to stop. The statewide student startup competition took place in the spring. Daniel and I prepared our presentation carefully, printed color slides, even practiced speaking in front of the mirror to calm our nerves. When I stepped onto the stage, my heart was pounding wildly, but I looked out at the audience and thought of my grandfather. I imagined him sitting somewhere, smiling at me with the same encouragement he once gave. I took a deep breath and began telling my story from a girl who once slept in her car to the founder of Split Nest. When I ended with the words, "We want to help students worry less about the small things so they can focus on their big dreams," the room erupted in applause. That day, Split Nest won a $20,000 prize. I held the oversized check tightly, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just money, it was the first proof that I could truly turn pain into power. With this money, I could upgrade the app, rent more servers, and most importantly, continue my studies without constantly fearing I wouldn't have enough for food or textbooks. But even in the surge of joy, I never forgot what had brought me here. Each time I looked at the prize check hanging on my dorm wall, I remembered my 18th birthday when my bank account showed 0. I remembered my father's cold face, my mother's cutting words, and Vanessa's triumphant smile. Those memories didn't disappear. They still ached, but now I used them as a quiet fire pushing me further. I swore to myself I would build my career from nothing, and one day, when they looked back, they would understand the price of losing me. When I graduated from Ohio State University, I stood at a crossroads, continue developing SplitNest as a student project or turn it into a real company. I remember the last night in the dorm when Daniel, my trusted partner, and I sat on the floor watching lines of code run across the laptop screen. Daniel said, "Gina, if we don't try now, we might regret it for the rest of our lives." I stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. So we packed our bags and took a bus to Chicago, a vibrant city where I believed the dream of building a startup could come true. The early days in Chicago were a mix of hardship and excitement. I rented a cramped apartment in West Loop and turned the living room into our office. Our desk was an old wooden table from a thrift shop, our chairs mismatched, and our server propped up on a metal rack. We registered the company under the name Summit Finance, with a vision to create simple, transparent financial solutions for students. SplitNest was just the beginning. I wanted to build a fintech ecosystem that would help students manage expenses, build credit, and learn how to save. In those first months, I was the CEO, the coder, and the customer support all at once. By day, I rushed to universities around Chicago to pitch our product. By night, I stayed up fixing bugs, answering support emails, and drafting business plans to attract investors. There were mornings when I collapsed at my desk and woke up with the sun already high, still in the same clothes from the night before. Daniel often laughed and encouraged me. "At least we're not sleeping in a car anymore, Gina." I smiled, but deep inside, I never forgot that memory. It was the reason I was determined to see this through to the end. Our first customers beyond the circle of students in Ohio came in our second year. A group of medical students at Northwestern University approached Summit Finance asking us to build a feature for managing student loan payments. They didn't just want to split rent, they wanted tools to track debt, schedule installments, and receive automatic reminders. We threw ourselves into building a new version, integrating a credit builder feature for students. In the very first month after launch, we had over 10,000 downloads. I started receiving emails from students I had never met, telling me our app helped them avoid late fees, that it gave them their very first positive credit score. Reading those words, I felt tears well up, and at the same time, a sense of responsibility heavier than ever before. By the third year, Summit Finance had grown into a small team of 12. We worked in a bright co-working space, but still carried the same startup spirit, eating cold pizza at midnight, cheering when a line of code finally worked, and shouting with joy when the user count spiked. Revenue began to flow in, not a fortune yet, but enough to cover expenses and reinvest in growth. I still remember the first time I signed a contract with a university to roll out our solution for thousands of students. My hand trembled as I held the pen, as though I were signing my name directly onto the dream I'd carried since I was 18. In our fifth year, we decided to raise a Series A round. I stood in a polished conference room, facing a row of investors in sharp suits. My hands trembled slightly, but I thought back to the days of scrubbing dishes, the nights curled up in my car, and I knew I had been preparing my whole life for this moment. I laid out the vision of Summit Finance, to build a nationwide fintech platform for students, helping them avoid the financial mistakes of the generations before them. When I finished my pitch, the room was silent for a few seconds, then burst into applause. A week later, we officially secured a $5 million investment from Great Lakes Ventures. Holding the contract worth millions in my hands, my first thought wasn't about money. It was about that 18th birthday when my bank account had shown zero. I had gone from absolute nothingness to running a company valued in the tens of millions, from sleeping in my car to signing deals with major investors. All in less than a decade. By the time I was 27, Summit Finance was generating millions in annual revenue, and I was officially a millionaire. The press began to take notice, writing about me as a young female CEO rising from adversity. They asked me for the secret to success. I only smiled and said, "The only secret is not letting betrayal define you." But deep down, I knew my success came not only from effort, but from the quiet fire of past pain. That betrayal had forced me to rise, to go further than anyone had ever believed I could. I bought a small apartment by Lake Michigan, not far from the company headquarters, as a reward for myself. Every morning, I sat by the window, watching the sunrise shimmer across the water, and thought of the 18-year-old girl who once washed her face in a Walmart bathroom. That girl was still inside me, reminding me that no matter how far I had come, I could never forget where I started. I still kept the little key my grandfather had given me, resting on my desk as a symbol. It reminded me that true freedom wasn't the balance in my account, it was the ability to rewrite my destiny with my own hands. While I was busy building a future, my parents and Vanessa were busy pushing themselves into a downward spiral with no way out. From afar, I heard through relatives that my parents had poured money into supporting Vanessa and her husband to launch an online fashion company. They boasted everywhere that their youngest daughter was about to become a famous designer, that it was a guaranteed investment. I wasn't surprised. My whole childhood they had always believed Vanessa was the shining star. But just a few years later, that bubble burst. The market was brutally competitive, Vanessa's products lacked distinction, and the company quickly drowned in debt. The credit cards my parents had co-signed were maxed out, and even the mortgage on their house was leveraged to funnel money into the failing venture. Financial strains soon bled into Vanessa's marriage. Arguments escalated into bitter verbal fights, and eventually, the divorce came as no surprise. Vanessa moved back into my parents' house with her 2 young children. And even then, my parents never blamed her. They kept shielding her, indulging her, pretending her failures were nothing more than bad timing. In their eyes, Vanessa was still the daughter who needed protection, while I, the forgotten child, simply no longer existed in the story of this family. During those years, I cut off all contact. No calls, no messages, no letters. But then one day, just after I had finished a strategy meeting with my team at the Chicago headquarters, my assistant hurried in, her face pale. "Gina, there's an older couple and a woman with them. They say they're your family. They're sitting in the lobby." For a moment, I froze. How long had it been since I'd heard the words, "your family," directed at me? I drew in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. When I stepped into the reception area, I saw that my parents had aged noticeably. My father's hair was streaked with gray, and my mother's face was etched with deep lines of worry. Vanessa sat beside them, dressed fashionably as always, but her eyes were dull and tired. Her 2 small children sat absorbed in their phones, oblivious to everything around them. All 3 of them shot to their feet when they saw me, their smiles tight and awkward. My father straightened his back, his eyes fixed on me as if trying to summon the old authority he once held in the family. His voice carried both arrogance and desperation. "Gina, you have more money now than you'll ever need. You're not lacking anything. But your sister needs a home to raise her children. You're the older one, you're supposed to shoulder this. It's the right thing to do." My mother cut in, tears brimming in her eyes. "Don't let us lose the place we've lived our whole lives. If you don't help, the bank will take everything. Vanessa won't survive it." I heard every word, but to me, they sounded like echoes from a far-off place. I was no longer the trembling 18-year-old girl. I had sat in multi-million-dollar boardrooms, signed contracts where a single stroke of my pen changed the lives of hundreds of people. I no longer needed to prove to them that I had the power to choose. I had held that power for years. I reached for the leather case beside my chair and slowly pulled out a folder I had kept hidden for a long time. I flipped through the pages until I stopped at one yellowed sheet, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Placing it on the table, I slid it toward them. "This is a copy of the trust document Grandpa Patrick created when I was 12, I said slowly, my voice steady and firm. "It states clearly, the $40,000 education fund was my legal property, to be used solely for my education. You had no right to touch it, and even less right to turn it into a down payment for Vanessa's house. You violated his wishes and betrayed the only trust he ever placed in me." "AG." My father bent down to look at the document, his face paling. He stammered, This was a long time ago. You're successful now, why bring it up? We're family, surely you wouldn't." I cut him off, my voice sharp as steel. "Family? When I needed you most, When I stood at the threshold of my future, you took my chance away without a second thought. You turned my dream into a down payment for my sister. From that moment on, I was no longer your child, at least not in your eyes. Ah. My mother's trembling hand reached out to pull the paper toward her, but I held it down firmly. No need to look again, I said, locking eyes with her. I've kept it all these years, as proof that I wasn't crazy, that I didn't imagine it. I knew you would never admit your mistake, so I kept it to remind myself, never forget the day I was betrayed. The air in the room grew heavy. Vanessa lowered her head, her hands twisting together. I saw a flicker of shame cross her face, but it quickly gave way to a pleading look. Sister, if you help, I promise I'll change. My kids need a home. I looked at her, the same sister who had smirked when I walked out of the house with nothing but an old suitcase. A storm of emotions rose inside me, but it all condensed into one truth. My responsibility no longer belonged to them. I stood up slowly, gathering the documents and sliding them back into my case. You took my 18th year from me, I said, my voice calm but cutting. But you could not take my future. I built it from nothing, from cold nights in a car, from packets of instant noodles. And it was your betrayal that became the fuel that brought me here. But that does not mean I will continue to pay for your mistakes. My father jumped to his feet, his voice rising. Gina, you're ungrateful. If your grandfather were alive, he'd want you to help your family. I stopped at the door, turned back, and met his eyes squarely. If he were alive, he would never have allowed you to take my education fund in the first place. He trusted me, not you. Then I turned and walked away. I stepped out of the conference room, leaving a heavy silence behind. The door closing felt like a final boundary drawn. In that moment, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had set a clear line. I had refused to shoulder consequences that weren't mine. I didn't know how they would handle the bank, didn't know what would happen to the house, but that was no longer my responsibility. After that final confrontation, I walked out of the headquarters with my steps light, as if touching solid ground for the first time. The feeling was hard to describe, part sorrow, part release, part as if an old wound had finally been stitched closed. I knew that from that moment on, I had severed the cord tying me to a family built on favoritism and control. And I knew that to truly heal, I needed a new space, a new life. I chose to buy a small apartment by Lake Michigan, not far from downtown Chicago. It was on the 11th floor, with wide glass windows overlooking the deep blue water. In the mornings, sunlight pierced through a thin mist, shimmering across the rippling waves. At night, the city lights glowed against the stillness of the lake, making the place feel like a world of its own. Each morning when I woke, I no longer heard my parents' arguments, no longer endured bitter comparisons to my sister. I heard only the sound of waves against the shore and the steady beat of my own heart, peaceful, yet strong. I began therapy. The first time I sat in the small office of my therapist, I felt awkward. But when she gently asked, Gina, when was the last time you felt safe in your family? I broke down. I spoke of forgotten birthdays, of dinners where I was told to eat less so your sister has more, of the night at 18 when I walked out of the house clutching my suitcase. Each session was a journey back into painful memories, but also a process of untying knots that had bound me for years. I learned to see that what my parents did not define my worth. I learned that setting boundaries, saying no, was not selfish, but a way of protecting myself. While I was finding new peace, my parents and Vanessa were unraveling into crisis. The house they had once bought with my college fund was finally seized by the bank. They had mortgaged it too many times to cover mounting debts, and when they could no longer keep up, the foreclosure notice was posted on the front door. Neighbors whispered, "The Carters used to hold their heads so high, now they're no better than people living off scraps." My parents, who had always prized appearances above all else, now lived in a cramped rental apartment in a modest neighborhood. Their pride lay in ruins, yet instead of admitting fault, they lived in bitterness and blame. After the divorce, Vanessa didn't fare much better. She moved back in with our parents, bringing her 2 children along, and continued to be coddled just as she had been when we were kids. But the shadow of failure and the whispers of gossip stripped away the confidence she once carried. I didn't feel satisfaction in knowing this, but neither did I feel pity. Everyone must face the consequences of their choices. She had chosen the easy path, leaning on others, and now she was paying the price. During that time, I thought often about the future of her children, my nieces and nephews who were innocent in all of this. I didn't want them to grow up trapped in the same cycle of toxic indulgence, only to repeat the same tragic pattern. I remembered my grandfather Patrick, the look in his eyes as he placed that small key into my hand. He had said, "This is the key to your freedom." He gave me a chance, even though my parents betrayed it. And I wanted to do the same for the next generation. I established the Patrick Carter Scholarship Fund, a program to support underprivileged but determined students, giving opportunities to young people who longed to rise but lacked the resources. Each year, the fund awarded dozens of full scholarships, ensuring that no student had to abandon their dreams simply because of money. At the first scholarship ceremony, standing at the podium, I looked out at the bright, hopeful faces of the recipients and saw my younger self among them. I wanted those children to know that someone believed in them just as my grandfather once believed in me. I didn't stop there. I quietly established an educational trust fund under the name Patrick Carter Scholarship, dedicated solely to Vanessa's 2 children. The trust was placed under the management of an attorney, with strict conditions. The money could only be used for educational purposes, tuition, books, extracurricular programs. Neither my parents nor Vanessa had any authority to interfere, let alone withdraw the funds for meaningless spending. I did this not to rescue Vanessa, but to sever the toxic cycle passed down from the previous generation. I couldn't change my parents, nor could I change Vanessa, but I could ensure that her children would have a fair chance to grow up with the opportunities I was denied. The day I signed the documents, I sat quietly in my office, looking out at Lake Michigan. I felt as if I had just laid another brick in the bridge to the future, not my future, but theirs. I didn't hope for their gratitude. I only hoped they would walk a path I once dreamed of but nearly lost. In my office hangs a small wooden plaque, carved with the words, "Family doesn't mean control, boundaries mean strength." Every time I looked at it, I remembered the long, tear-filled journey from the 18-year-old girl sleeping in her car to the 27-year-old woman running a multi-million-dollar company. I remembered the cold nights, the biting remarks, the mocking smiles. But now, I no longer trembled at those memories. I felt grateful because the pain had forged me into a stronger version of myself. As this story comes to a close, I realize I didn't just reclaim my worth, I transformed wounds into strength. I walked away from a toxic family and built the life they once believed I could never have. And I know this journey isn't just mine, it's a message to anyone lost in the shadows of favoritism and betrayal. You can break free, you can build your own future. The scars will remain, but they are not weakness, they are proof of survival and growth. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in the next family story, aired daily here on Familial Stories Exposed.